Cross-country mountain biking has seen a resurgence of popularity in recent years, or so many modern mountain bikers might have you think. Look, I'm part of that crowd as well, and I thought we were the cool, popular gang. But when you see events like the Roc d'Azur in the south of France getting more than 20,000 people competing in cross-country races during a week, you begin to see the real landscape of mountain biking. But what does a modern-day cross-country bike even look like? Have these bikes changed at all over the last 10 years? And who should even buy one of these things instead of, say, a 150mm travel trail bike? I'll answer those questions and more in this video, which is part of a series of videos where I take a different look at the bikes of each of mountain biking's subgenres. So hit the subscribe button below if you enjoyed this one and you'd like to see some more. In this video, I'm going to be joined by professional racer and YouTube creator Sid Schultz.
XC bikes are definitely not lame these days at all, and they may be the most fun bike for the kind of terrain that you have around you.
And joining Sid is professional elite racer Erin Huck.
A cross-country bike is better than like a trail or an enduro bike because it is so much more nimble.
There's a lot to cover, so let's get into it. If we focus on the racing side, we find that this is where these bikes came from, the original way of competing on a mountain bike. A mass start race, completing a set number of laps and finding out who is the fastest at the end. And that's just one format of cross-country racing.
Cross-country racing, compared to 10 years ago, it was very focused on the lightest equipment. That meant racing your hardtail, so no rear suspension. We still had disc brakes, but they weren't quite as advanced as they are now with like the fin cooling technology and all of that. Probably a triple front gearing, and now we just have like the single chainring up front. Actually, quite a few changes over the past 10 years.
Cross-country bikes have definitely had a shake-up in their design in recent years, just like the other mountain bike categories, and possibly even more so. I put this down to two main reasons. The first being that at an elite level, the cross-country World Cups have had their racetracks shortened and the gnar factor turned up a bit.
So the cross-country courses now compared to probably 10 years ago, they are more technical. So you're going to see some BMX style components in there. We've got some like gap jumps usually.
These races are taking on multiple laps of legit terrain on bikes that weigh hardly anything. So designers have been forced to make their bikes more aggressive with better geometry and capable of handling more chunk.
Now the World Cup courses are getting pretty technical, and there are some drops, and you see riders riding full suspension and winning on full suspension, having dropper posts and wider tires and wider bars.
The other reason being that many riders have been picking up a short travel cross-country bike and riding it just as hard as something with more suspension. The characteristics of an XC bike translates to a very maneuverable machine and a new experience that's challenging a lot of modern mountain bikers on the trail. Many are finding that they don't need as much suspension as they thought, and a bike with tougher components with updated geometry is more suitable for them. Cross-country bikes have been through every possible change that you can imagine over the years.
We've seen some changes in wheel sizes. So we started on 26-inch wheels, and then we went to 29. I jumped on that bandwagon almost immediately and loved it because they just roll over anything.
You might find some hardtails, but these are purely for the race-focused crowd.
Initially, cross-country was all hardtail, right? You didn't have that rear suspension. And then they started making these full suspension bikes lighter and more able. And so now everybody's on a cross-country bike with full suspension.
I would say anything that has less than 120 millimeters of suspension is most likely an XC bike.
And in the professional world of racing, you'll also see those previous hardtail enthusiasts switch to this kind of mountain bike as well. You'll also see lighter weight tyres with a less aggressive tread pattern, disc brakes that are smaller at around 160mm in diameter, narrower handlebars, and a dropper post. Well, the dropper post is still up for debate.
So I think some cross-country racers opt not to run a dropper post purely for weight. Still, you're going to find like 80% of the field is going to have a dropper post. Nino is the one example that he hardly ever runs one, but he doesn't need it.
While you'll see more aluminium bikes in the trail and enduro bike categories, carbon is the material of choice here. Bikes must be as light as possible, and grams mean a lot. So the dropper post hasn't quite made it onto every racer's machine. But for the weekend rider, they are of course a must.
I have a dropper post on all of my bikes, and that enables me to race either a hardtail or a full suspension, feel like I'm in control, and such a big difference. I don't have the bruises that I used to have from hitting my seat.
Let's talk about what the modern cross-country bike looks like, because these things are a lot of fun and might get overlooked by some mountain bikers when considering their next bike. By putting a nice long dropper post, bigger disc rotors, wider handlebars paired with a shorter stem and some chunkier tyres, these bikes are suddenly transformed into something that can survive a lot more than you think.
I think that the definition is changing for sure. That doesn't mean though that someone might not buy a cross-country bike and decide that they want a little bit more braking power and put on some 180mm rotors. Like, you can still totally do that and it can still be a cross-country bike.
My 120mm bike has had this makeover, and I'm always blown away by what it can take. Of course, it's not going to survive everything out there, and there's no chance I'm going to be sending it off drops anytime soon.
Yeah, probably not. I don't really know what I was thinking.
But what it does do is transform the more mellower trails into something far more enjoyable. The fact that these bikes are lighter and more responsive means that you don't have to have the craziest terrain on your local loop. You can ride a bike that's going to get the most out of your trails in your local area. The geometry of these bikes does mean that they are more comfortable when riding longer distances. Those rides where it's about covering terrain for many hours and climbing up and down trails that are going to be huge for your year-end Strava stats. You are more stretched out, and those big days in the saddle are just a lot easier.
I would definitely say that as the bike technology has improved, my skills have improved. All these things make you more confident as a racer, and the more confident you are, the more likely you're going to try things, and then it's just like a natural progression of skill level.
I have talked about being overbiked before in my trail bike video, but again, these 120mm bikes will be even more suitable in a whole number of locations. They are, in truth, far easier to ride because of their attributes than you'd think, which is likely the opposite of what most people might believe. But let's dive into my positives and negatives about this category.
One of the biggest advantages about having a cross-country bike is how lightweight they are. This is my Scott Spark, and it's fully carbon handlebars, carbon wheels, carbon frame. Now that low weight is going to make it much easier to really accelerate out on the trail, and especially trails like this. Now what we've got here is a very typical cross-country style trail. It's not that technical, it's not that steep, it's quite flat actually, and it's not very rough. Now as you can see here, we've got a section where it goes down and then up into a punchy climb. And this is where a cross-country bike is going to excel versus a trail bike that might weigh 4 or 5 pounds heavier. You're going to be able to maintain your speed and also accelerate far easier.
When I competed in the BC bike race last year, a multi-day race covering over 300 kilometers or about 200 miles in just 7 days, having this bike basically made it possible for me to complete this course. A trail bike would have slowed me down and sapped so much energy that I wouldn't have been able to turn the pedals anymore by day 5.
I think cross-country bikes are super fun on kind of rolling fast single track that has like punchy climbs where you really benefit from the lightness of that bike and there isn't that much time descending.
So if your goal with mountain biking is to get fitter, having a more cross-country style of mountain bike might just be the ticket. Because of the lighter weight, you're not going to be held back at all by the machine when you're going up a hill, which means that there will be less friction for you to get out there and clock up some vertical gains. But what about fun? I know this might be incredible new information to learn, but mountain biking is meant to be enjoyable. And honestly, when I've pulled out my souped up cross-country bike, I've had some of the most enjoyable rides of the year.
So I can maneuver and manipulate my bike a lot more easily than I can on a trail or an enduro bike that just weighs a little bit more, whereas a cross-country bike is really just set up to be like slower speeds descending so that you're picking your way through things. And that's my preferred riding style.
Namely because sometimes I just want to go out and cruise around some trails, maybe see a view or two and chat with some friends. I don't need to be sending it 24/7 on the double blacks of Squamish, BC. It opens up intermediate trails to be ridden in a different way, where your giant sofa of a mountain bike was previously just doing all the work for you. With a more agile ride beneath you, it transforms trails that you might have thought of as boring into something that you'll probably enjoy. That's certainly what I found out. And this leads us perfectly into thanking Competitive Cyclist for sponsoring this video. In my previous video, I offered up $500 that you can spend with the online retailer, and I'm pleased to say that the winner has been chosen by my mum. Hi Mum, I've got my computer here, I've loaded up all the comments, scroll randomly through and find some and have a read.
I would spend it on helmet lighting to make the forest trails much safer to hit at speed at night.
Okay, Biking JP. Right, let's find if he's done all the other stuff. Biking with JP, he follows me. Now, does he follow Competitive Cyclist? He does follow Competitive Cyclist as well. Mum, you've chosen a winner. Congratulations, Biking with JP. And that means that I have another $500 to give away. All you need to do is comment below this video saying what you would spend the $500 on. Then make sure you follow me on Instagram @PaulThePunter and also follow Competitive Cyclist as well. You must do all 3 things to be in with a chance of winning. I definitely used the money to beef up a cross-country bike by picking up some 4-pot Shimano Dior disc brakes. I'd put on some wider 1-Up Components handlebars to help with the handling, and I've actually been trying out these Kenda Hellcats lately, and they've been great. And boy, am I a super fan of the Shimano AM7 shoes. And you can head over to Competitive Cyclist now by hitting the link in the description of this video and using code PUNTER15 to get 15% off your first purchase. And maybe you could ask their knowledgeable gearheads about how you can toughen up your own bike. They probably know. You have 2 weeks from when this video is published to get your entries in, and make sure you do all 3 things. Okay, back to the video. While it might seem obvious to some, it won't be to others. But the downsides of having less suspension means that you will be limited in what your bike is capable of. You will be surprised by what it can do, but it will mean that you're going to need a bit more skill to ride tougher trails.
Okay. What would that have been like on a trail bike versus
Oh, I wouldn't, there would have been nothing.
And the lightness of the bike will mean that you're going to get pinged around a little bit more on the trail, as a heavier bike will track the ground more comfortably. You'll be a lot more stable as the suspension absorbs more of the rough terrain.
Obviously the biggest downside of a cross-country bike is that it will not feel as comfortable on fast, techy terrain as a larger travel bike that has a more aggressive geometry.
So who should buy a modern day cross-country bike? The easy answer is someone who wants to race cross-country and focus on pushing themselves athletically, instead of pushing themselves with sending the hardest trails. Another answer is someone who sees mountain biking as more of a leisurely activity and just wants to enjoy being outside. Pedaling around mountain bike trails just for the hell of it is great, and you don't need a whole lot of suspension for that. The final person is someone who is looking for a new challenge. With the modifications I talked about at the beginning, turning a short travel bike into something a bit burlier creates the ultimate smile giver. Having a nippy, big-wheeled bike is rad, and at a time where we can't travel to those ultimate destinations, it might just be the answer to freshening up your local spots.
Whoever you are watching this video, do not discount XC bikes. It may be for you, it may not be, but don't put it down.
I'm biased, but I think the cross-country bike is great for women that are just getting into the sport, especially. I think having something on the lighter end that's faster, you get the feel for how to maneuver your bike.
If you enjoyed this video and would like to catch my next videos, then please hit the subscribe button. It's completely free to do so that you don't miss out on any of my future videos. And if you're a fan of cross-country bikes, then hit the like button. Cheers punters, I'll see you next time.